Hellcat.
Hello and welcome back to the channel where once again it's time for another Saturn review, and as you will have seen by today's video title, it's a game that wasn't released in the PAL territory, and that is Albert Odyssey. So initially this game was released in August of '96 in Japan, followed by a July '97 release in America, and it follows the story of a young boy named Pike whose parents are killed near the start of the game, and then he's taken in by a group of human-like bird creatures called harpies who raise him in their village, and the story progresses where several years later evil mages attack the village and his adoptive sisters turn to stone, so Pike sets out on a quest to find a cure for her, and obviously along the way he meets friends, they team up with him, they realise loads of other people have been turned to stone as well, and their initial quest is to stop the mage who did this to everybody and restore everybody back to normal. Now you do get some background info and story from the beginning of the game, but it is so boring and so poorly spoken that the likelihood is you will skip it because you really won't be able to take any of it in. So once you start playing the game, you'll realise it's a traditional style two-dimensional RPG, similar to all the ones that came out in the years previous to this. You have your original character, he meets new people along the way, they join your team, you level them up, you go from town to town, buy new weapons and items, go into the dungeons, beating the bosses, progressing with the story until eventually you get to the main boss of the game. Now the game is actually split up into two separate stories. So the initial story is, like I said at the start of the game, there's characters who've been turned to stone by an evil mage, and your quest is to stop that, rescue them, defeat those mages. And then the second part of the story, one of your characters is swapped out for somebody else, and you realise there's a much bigger scheme at hand, and the evil group of evil mages are trying to bring back this evil being known as Vlag, and your quest is to completely stop them in their tracks to make sure that doesn't happen. So graphically the game's split up into the two-dimensional areas that you explore, the battle graphics which are side-on two-dimensional, and the world map. Now graphically this game is pretty pleasing on the eye. It's a nice quality 2D RPG. It's higher than what you'd have expected from the Super Nintendo or the Mega Drive, and this game was initially planned to be released on the Super Nintendo, but it was moved over to the Saturn, and I think it benefits for that. Definitely good quality two-dimensional sprites, backgrounds, towns, everything about the in-game graphics from exploring the areas and in the battles. Definitely haven't got any faults with that. There aren't too many special effects to really catch your eye though. I think that's probably a downside. The only downside probably graphically is the world map locations. When you're traveling the world map, the game is pretty chuggy. It's not great on the world map, but graphically that's probably the only downside I could finger really at this game. So all the sound effects and music are pretty standard stuff really for the RPG genre of this time. Nothing really to write home about. I think all the music suits the game. It's not completely memorable like a Final Fantasy. The battle tune will probably stick in your head, but that'll probably be it. But there is no complaints in terms of sound effects in battles and music and everything for all the different locations. I think it fits the game perfectly well. Definitely a good point, but like I said, not entirely memorable. So how does it play? Well, it plays about as simplistic I think as any RPG could. It's literally just moving around. There's not even a run button. Simply pick your attack, pick your item, pick your magic spell in battle. Another button cancels. It's very simplistic. It is really easy. I'm not going to lie, this game's not particularly difficult. Really similar to Magic Knight Wraith. I kind of feel like these are introductory RPGs. Now the only time it does get difficult is right near the end of the game when the 4 towers come up and you need to beat them, and you probably do need to level up about 5 or 6 levels before you do that first tower and get to the boss. Otherwise you will find it difficult, but that really is the only time I found in the entire game where there was a bit of challenge to the game. Once you've got those few levels up, you can just beat those bosses, beat the final boss. It's not really much of a challenge. And one thing about the way the boss battles pan out, some of them can be very long and they have a lot of HP, and the battles don't have that much variety because your characters don't have any special moves, so sort of like limit breaks or charged attacks, they don't have them. So some of your characters will just be there doing their standard physical attack over and over again, and it is a bit, they do get repetitive, some of the battles they do. I mean, the normal battles on the game, the random encounters, can be dealt with really quick. One of your characters has a standard AoE physical attack, and the magic spells that you get from Pike and the Mage, they can just wipe everybody out in one go. So the standard battles can be done really quick. So you can level up in this game pretty quick. It's just the boss battles can be a little bit boring, a little bit slow paced, and they probably do add a little bit of frustration to the game. Another thing about the game, not necessarily the way it plays, but it has got these little loading times. So when you come off a menu, there's a loading time. When you enter into a battle, there's 2 or 3 loading seconds before the music plays and before the battle starts. And when you come off the menu and go onto the world map, it has to load and start the music again. And these little niggles just bring the whole gameplay experience down a bit in my eyes. It's not quite as fluid as I wanted it to be. I'm not saying it negatively affects the game massively, but it just adds a little bit of frustration to the way it plays. So what kind of lifespan can you expect from this game? Now, the game doesn't have an in-game timer, so I wasn't sure what my playtime was, but I'm going to hazard a guess. It was probably around 25 hours. It's basically a very linear RPG. There's no real side quests or anything like that. So it's the kind of game you will play through once and enjoy relatively well, I think. To be honest, I think it's pretty enjoyable. The story kind of keeps you interested, especially as it breaks up partway through the game, and then you've sort of like got a secondary story starts for the latter half of the game. I think that's good. It keeps you hooked, it keeps you enjoyable. The fact you change over one of the characters too is pretty interesting. Again though, it doesn't offer anything new at all to the RPG genre. There's nothing unique, nothing special about this game. It's nice looking, the music's good, and it plays as well as any other 2D RPG of that era and the previous 5 years, if I'm perfectly honest. Value for money wise, well, if you're going to buy a physical copy of this game, it's going to set you back several £100. So, like me, you may well go down the reproduction route. I got a repro of this game for £8.50 from a website, so that was fine. It's well worth the £8.50. Is it worth paying 300 quid for to play though? No, of course it's not. You're not going to get that much lifespan out of the game. So whether you want the actual physical copy in your collection or whether you're like me, happy to play a replay, that's a big decision, because only the extreme collectionists will have this in their collection. It really is one of the rarest, most expensive Saturn games from the US market that you can get. Is it worth playing though? Yeah, it's definitely worth playing. It's worth a single playthrough. It's an enjoyable story. The only downsides, like I've said, are the little loading times and some of the cringy humour. You wouldn't get away with that in games nowadays, especially when your characters are supposed to be teenagers. Some of the innuendos and suggestions are just things that you would not see in games nowadays that are supposedly, you've got teenagers as your characters in who are, under the legal age. So those kind of things, you ain't going to get those in games anymore. But it is what it is. It's a pretty nice, easy playing 2D RPG. It's a pretty good introductory RPG as well, pretty much like Magic Knight Wraith. There's nothing too difficult about this game. Like I said, there's only one small part in the game where you might need to get a few levels up, and that is really it. But for a game to play through in a couple of weeks, maybe an hour or two a day, yeah, it fits the bill perfectly. Is it going to set your heart on fire and your pulse racing? No, I'm afraid not. It's no Final Fantasy VII, put it that way. What are your thoughts on Albert Odyssey? Have you played it? How high do you rate it in the Saturn sort of pecking order of RPGs? Because there aren't really that many that are English translated anyway. That is it for today. Thank you for watching, and I shall see you again soon for another Saturn review. Goodbye for now.